The city buzzed with life. Cars honking, people rushing, the hum of conversations blending into the crisp autumn air. Naomi Hayes stepped out of a cab, smoothing a hand over her baby bump, feeling a flutter of excitement. It wasn't planned, this visit. She just missed him. Missed them. Her husband, Damien Hayes, had always been a man in motion, a self-made millionaire, a relentless entrepreneur. But today, she imagined a quiet afternoon together. Just the two of them, before his next flight whisked him away. She hadn't expected to see him at all before she reached his office. But there he was, just a few steps ahead, standing near the grand fountain in the center of Westbridge Plaza. And he wasn't alone. A woman, tall, striking, with dark waves cascading over her shoulders, stood in front of him. Naomi barely had time to register the scene before Damien pulled the woman close, his hands firm on her waist. Their lips met in a kiss, slow, deep, and utterly familiar. The world around Naomi blurred. The city, the noise, the movement, it all faded, leaving only the sound of her own breath catching in her throat. In that moment, the carefully built life she had with Damien began to splinter. What other secrets lurked beneath their perfect facade? And how much of their love had been real at all? If you think this is just another story of heartbreak, think again. This is about choices, deception, and the kind of betrayal that comes at a price no one ever sees coming. Naomi wasn't the kind of woman who chased wealth or status. She grew up in a quiet coastal town in Maine, where kindness meant more than money and love was supposed to be enough. That belief carried her through life, right up until the night she met Damien. It was at a high-profile investors' gala at the Halston Grand in Manhattan. Naomi wasn't even supposed to be there. She had only come to help a friend with the guest list. But then he arrived. Damien Hayes, confident, charismatic, effortlessly in control. Unlike the other millionaires in the room, he didn't launch into a speech about his success. Instead, he asked about her, what she dreamed of, what made her happy. His focus was intense, his interest disarming. A year later, they were exchanging vows under a canopy of twinkling lights at a vineyard in Napa. It felt like magic. The guests danced, her parents beamed, and the future stretched before her like a promise. Moving into Damien's penthouse in downtown Chicago felt like stepping into another world. The sleek, modern space had a panoramic view of the skyline, curated artwork, and a staff that ensured life unfolded without a hitch. Damien's career soared. He built his empire advising tech startups, and within a few years, he was hailed as a visionary in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. His schedule, however, was punishing. Tokyo on Monday, London by Wednesday, back to New York for a high-stakes negotiation by Friday. At first, Naomi admired his drive. She threw herself into volunteer work, supporting arts programs for underprivileged children, and even considered launching her own nonprofit. Damien encouraged her. From a distance, their conversations became shorter, their time together more fleeting. Still, he made grand gestures. Surprise flower deliveries, spa days at the peninsula, private dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. And every time he wrapped her in his arms after a long trip, she told herself it was enough. But time has a way of revealing cracks. The warmth in his voice when they spoke started to cool. His messages became delayed. And then, on the day of their wedding anniversary, she found him in another woman's arms. Damien arrived at the restaurant 2 hours late, offering a familiar excuse. His meeting had run longer than expected. He kissed Naomi's cheek absent-mindedly before sinking into his chair, eyes flickering to his phone every few minutes. Though he was physically present, his mind seemed tethered elsewhere, lost in a maze of spreadsheets, business acquisitions, and unread emails. In the quiet corners of their sprawling penthouse, Naomi sometimes felt less like a wife and more like a guest. She told herself it was just part of being married to a high-powered businessman. Success came with sacrifices, after all. But no matter how often she tried to silence her doubts, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. She had no way of knowing that soon, those lingering uncertainties would crash into a brutal reality. A single moment, an unexpected glimpse in a public place, was about to shatter everything she believed about her marriage. The universe had been sending her whispers, but now it was preparing to scream. A few weeks before that devastating discovery, Naomi had an unsettling dream. She saw Damien in a crowd of faceless people, his figure moving away from her, hand in hand with another woman. She couldn't see the woman's face, only the way Damien leaned into her. Familiar, intimate. The dream left Naomi shaken. The next morning, over breakfast, she mentioned it. "I had the strangest dream last night," she said lightly, searching his face for any reaction. "You were walking away with someone else. I couldn't see who it was, but it felt so real." Damien chuckled, shaking his head. "Just a dream," he said, quickly shifting the conversation to his upcoming trip to Boston. Naomi tried to let it go. Damien had never been cruel or dismissive. In fact, his kindness was one of the things she had always admired most about him. When their elderly neighbor fell and broke her hip, he quietly covered her medical bills. When a friend's nonprofit struggled to fund a children's library, he wrote a check without hesitation. That generosity had been part of what made her fall in love with him. So why couldn't she shake this lingering unease? Naomi's closest friend, Claire, was the first to notice the shift in her mood. They met for brunch at La Belle Maison, their usual spot in the heart of downtown. Normally, Naomi would be the one animatedly chatting about her volunteer work or the latest art exhibit she had seen. Today, she seemed distracted, stirring her cappuccino absent-mindedly. Claire frowned. "You okay?" Naomi hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Damien's always so busy, but something feels different. I can't put my finger on it." Claire studied her thoughtfully. "Have you ever dropped by his office unexpectedly, or traveled with him for work? Sometimes seeing someone in their element gives you clarity." Naomi considered it. She had rarely visited Damien's office. He always insisted it was chaotic and not much fun for her. Maybe it was time to see for herself. That evening, over dinner, she brought up the idea. "I was thinking I'd drop by your office tomorrow. Bring lunch, meet your team," she said casually. Damien, who had been cutting into his steak, froze for a fraction of a second. A flash of something, alarm, annoyance, passed through his eyes before he quickly recovered, flashing a smile. "Oh, I'd love that," he said a little too quickly. "But tomorrow's jam-packed with back-to-back meetings. Maybe the day after would be better." Naomi forced a smile and nodded. "All right, I'll come by on Wednesday then." Damien gave a short nod and returned his attention to his plate. But Naomi had seen it. That flicker of tension, that moment of hesitation. It had been brief, but it was enough. As they carried on with small talk, an uneasy sensation settled in Naomi's stomach, an invisible thread pulling at the edges of her reality. Something wasn't right, and she was about to find out why. There are moments in life when a quiet unease transforms into certainty, when the storm clouds gathering on the horizon finally unleash their fury. Wednesday morning arrived cool and gray, the city skyline wrapped in a thin veil of clouds. Naomi Hayes woke early, her mind buzzing with an uneasy energy. Today, she was going to her husband's office, unannounced. She dressed with careful intent, choosing a beige cashmere sweater, tailored navy trousers, and low-heeled pumps. It was the perfect balance between sophistication and ease, appropriate for Damien's high-powered corporate world without seeming like she was trying too hard. After a light breakfast, she booked a ride and arrived at Hayes & Mercer Consulting just before noon. The steel and glass tower loomed over the busy streets of downtown Chicago, with business professionals weaving in and out, their conversations blending into the city's pulse. Naomi had only been here twice before, once during the company's grand opening, and another time when she dropped off a cake for Damien's birthday. But today felt different. Today she wasn't just visiting, she was searching. Stepping onto the 25th floor, Naomi entered the sleek, modern reception area. The space was adorned with contemporary art, minimalist furniture, and the faint aroma of expensive cologne. Behind a marble desk, a polished receptionist, Andrea, greeted her with a professional smile. "Mrs. Hayes, it's so nice to see you. Mr. Hayes is in a meeting, but I'll let him know you're here." Naomi nodded, trying to steady her nerves as she took a seat. She glanced around, watching employees hurry past with laptops and stacks of documents. The entire space radiated pressure. Deadlines, negotiations, high-stakes decisions. She wondered how Damien thrived in this constant whirlwind. Minutes passed. 10. Then 15. Finally, Andrea approached again, her smile touched with awkwardness. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hayes. It looks like Mr. Hayes is running late from an off-site meeting. We haven't heard from him yet." Naomi frowned. He had said he'd be here. I see, she replied, forcing a polite smile. Another 15 minutes passed. The tension in her chest tightened with each tick of the clock. Andrea returned, apologizing once more. Perhaps you could try calling him directly, she suggested. Naomi stepped away and dialed Damien's number. Voicemail. A small thread of unease unraveled in her mind. She sent a quick text. Hey, I'm at your office. Thought we were meeting. Everything okay? 10 minutes later, still no response. A flicker of doubt twisted into something heavier. Maybe he was caught in traffic. Maybe a deal negotiation had gone south. But another possibility gnawed at her, one she wasn't ready to name. She exhaled slowly, turning back to Andrea. Thank you, she said with a forced smile before heading for the elevators. But instead of going home, she made a decision. If Damien wasn't in his office, she would find him herself. Naomi had never been the kind of wife to pry. She had always respected Damien's space, his long hours, his need for privacy. But today was different. Today, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Stepping onto the bustling sidewalk, she hesitated for only a moment before flagging down a cab. Where to? The driver asked. Naomi gave him the address of the Sterling Club, Damien's favorite hotel bar where he often held off-site meetings. If he was there, she would find him. If not, she would keep looking. The taxi pulled into traffic, the city rushing past in a blur. With every passing block, her resolve hardened. Something was waiting for her at the end of this ride. She just wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. The city pulsed around her, horns blaring, sirens wailing, footsteps rushing past on the pavement. Yet, inside Naomi's mind, all she could hear was silence. A suffocating, unbearable silence. She stared out the taxi window, replaying the last few weeks in her head. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, the way Damien's touch had grown colder, his mind always elsewhere. She had ignored the signs, convinced herself that she was overthinking. But as each city block passed, her heartbeat pounded harder against her ribs. Where to, miss? The cab driver asked again, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Naomi exhaled sharply. The Royal Meridian Hotel. It was one of Damien's preferred meeting spots. A lavish venue known for hosting exclusive business lunches and discreet investor conversations. If he was anywhere, it was there. Naomi stepped out onto the sidewalk, pulling her sweater tightly around herself as a cold gust of wind snaked through the towering buildings. Inside, the Royal Meridian gleamed with opulence, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and an air of quiet luxury. She made her way toward the bar, a sleek lounge with tinted windows overlooking the bustling street. A few businessmen in tailored suits clustered around tables, their laptops open, cups of espresso abandoned mid-conversation. She scanned the room, searching for Damien's tall, broad-shouldered frame. Nothing. A flicker of relief surged through her, quickly followed by something else. Disappointment? Had she been wrong? Maybe he really was at a meeting elsewhere. The bartender, a neatly groomed young man, looked up as she approached. Afternoon, Mrs. Hayes, he greeted, recognizing her from previous visits with Damien. Naomi forced a polite smile. Has Damien been in today? The bartender hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. Yes, he was here earlier. Left about half an hour ago with a group, I believe. They might have gone to the sidewalk cafe outside to continue their discussion. Naomi's fingers curled around the strap of her handbag. Thank you, she murmured, already turning toward the exit. Her stomach twisted. Stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, Naomi scanned the courtyard cafe tucked between two towering office buildings. Bright umbrellas dotted the patio, shading clusters of patrons sipping coffee and chatting over late lunches. And then she saw him. Damien sat at a secluded table near a potted palm, leaning slightly forward, engaged in conversation. Across from him sat a woman, stunning, poised, with auburn hair cascading around her shoulders. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. She took a step closer. It wasn't just conversation. It was something more. The woman reached out, her fingers grazing Damien's arm in a way that sent an unmistakable chill through Naomi's body. And then it happened. The woman rose, moving around the small table with ease, like she had done it 100 times before. She slipped her arms around Damien's neck. And he, her husband, the man she had built a life with, wrapped his arms around her waist, their faces inches apart in an embrace so intimate, so painfully familiar that Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. The world around her dissolved. She wanted to look away, wanted to blink and wake up. But the sight remained agonizingly clear. Damien's body was pressed to another woman's, his hands resting where they had no right to be. And then, without meaning to, Naomi made a sound. A gasp, a sharp, strangled breath. Something that betrayed the heartbreak clawing its way up her throat. Damien's head snapped up. Their eyes met. A flicker of horror crossed his face. The woman in his arms felt him stiffen and turned to follow his gaze. And in that split second, Naomi saw it all. Guilt, shock, and something even more painful. Recognition. Damien didn't just look guilty, he looked caught. Naomi wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to disappear. But she stood frozen in place, tears burning at the edges of her vision. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Because in that moment, nothing needed to be said. It was all real. Painfully, undeniably real. And nothing would ever be the same again. The woman's arms were still draped around Damien's neck when realization struck. Her face paled as the weight of the situation crashed down on her. Quickly, she pulled away, stepping back with a stricken expression. Naomi inhaled sharply, her breath unsteady, every step forward echoing in her mind like a drumbeat of inevitability. The cafe had fallen into an uneasy silence. Conversations hushed, coffee cups paused mid-sip. Onlookers picked up on the unraveling scene, their curiosity sharp in the air. Damien lurched to his feet so abruptly that he nearly knocked over his coffee. "Naomi," he croaked, his voice hoarse. Her gaze flickered between him and the woman, the stranger who suddenly felt anything but. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled between fury and heartbreak. "What is going on here?" The words felt foreign on her tongue, like they belonged to someone else. Someone who still believed in the man standing before her. Damien opened his mouth, his jaw tightening, but no explanation came. His silence was a confession louder than words. The other woman shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if looking for an escape. She clutched her purse, mumbling, I'll go." But Naomi stepped in her path, arms crossed, her voice colder than she thought possible. "Wait," the woman froze. "You obviously know my husband. Before you run, I'd like to hear exactly who you are." A flush crept up the woman's neck. She hesitated, casting Damien a panicked glance, as if silently pleading for help. "I'm Valerie," she said at last, barely above a whisper. Her eyes refused to meet Naomi's. "I work with Damien. We're colleagues." Naomi let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Colleagues? Is that what we're calling it now? Because that didn't look like a business meeting to me." Valerie's face twisted with guilt. She opened her mouth, searching for words. "It's not. We've been working on a project together and we grew close, but—" "Stop." Naomi's voice cut through the air like a blade. She raised a trembling hand, silencing whatever excuse was about to follow. "Don't insult me by lying any further. I can see exactly what this is." She turned to Damien, who stood as if frozen in time, his face pale, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "How long?" she demanded, her voice barely holding together. "How long have you been betraying me like this?" Damien's shoulders slumped, his expression flickering with regret. "Naomi, please," he pleaded in a hushed tone, wary of the growing number of spectators. "Not here. Let's go somewhere private and talk." A bitter, broken laugh tore from Naomi's throat. "Private?" she repeated, her voice thick with pain. "You're the one who chose to do this in public, so why not talk about it right here?" She gestured around them at the handful of strangers who tried and failed to appear uninterested. Damien reached for her arm, but she jerked away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, as if those words meant anything. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Naomi's breath hitched. "Is there ever a good way for a wife to find out her husband is cheating?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Tears burned at the edges of her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest like a crushing force. She turned on her heel, pushing past Damien and Valerie, past the lingering stares, past the humiliation clinging to her like a second skin. Damien called her name, but she didn't stop. She stepped onto the bustling street, inhaling the crisp Chicago air, grounding herself against the city's chaos. Her world had just collapsed. But somewhere beneath the heartbreak, beneath the devastation, something else stirred. A spark of resolve. This would not break her. And Damien was about to learn just how costly his betrayal would be. Naomi drifted through the streets of Chicago, her feet carrying her aimlessly through the cold without thought or direction. She hadn't brought a coat, but the biting autumn air barely registered. All she could see, over and over, was Damien, his arms wrapped around another woman, the guilty shock in his eyes when he saw her standing there. It played in her mind like a cruel, looping film reel. By the time she finally stopped walking, she found herself in front of Claire's apartment, a cozy brownstone near Lincoln Park. Claire, her closest friend, the one person she could fall apart in front of without shame. When Claire opened the door, her expression shifted instantly from surprise to concern. Naomi stood there, her hair disheveled, eyes hollow, body trembling from exhaustion and heartbreak. Without a word, Claire pulled her into a tight embrace. They settled onto Claire's worn but comfortable couch, a half-empty tissue box between them. The dim glow of a single lamp cast long shadows on the walls. Naomi recounted everything: the courtyard cafe, the embrace, the way Damien had looked at her. I couldn't breathe," she whispered, voice raw. He was right there with her, in the open, like he didn't even care who saw. Claire's hands curled into fists, her hazel eyes burning with anger. "That's disgusting," she spat. "I always thought Damien respected you. To do something like this, so publicly, he's lost his damn mind." Naomi pressed her palms into her face, feeling another wave of tears threaten to spill. "I don't even know what to do next," she admitted. "Do I confront him at home? Demand an explanation? Or do I just leave?" Claire exhaled slowly, placing a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder. "First, breathe," she murmured. "And then, you decide what's right for you. But whatever you choose, you don't have to do this alone." They talked for hours, through cups of herbal tea, through takeout sushi. Claire ordered when she realized Naomi hadn't eaten all day. The conversation eventually turned practical. The penthouse, their finances, the possibility of separation. And with every minute that passed, something inside Naomi shifted. The devastation remained, but beneath it, anger stirred. "He doesn't just get to do this," she muttered, her voice steadier now. "He doesn't get to pretend everything is fine." Claire studied her carefully. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Naomi hesitated, glancing at the clock. Nearly midnight. She had no desire to see Damien, to listen to whatever excuse he had prepared. But at the same time, she refused to let him twist the truth before she even had a chance to confront him. "I should go home," she decided. "That's my house too. I have every right to be there." Claire nodded, squeezing her hand. "Text me if you need anything, and if you don't feel safe, you come right back here." Naomi promised she would, then stepped out into the night. The cab ride back to the penthouse felt interminable. Her phone buzzed a few times in her bag, likely messages from Damien. She didn't check them. She wasn't ready to hear whatever lies or justifications he had crafted. When the taxi pulled up to their high-rise, the doorman greeted her with the same polite nod he always did, blissfully unaware that her world had just imploded. Naomi stepped into the private elevator, her reflection staring back at her in the mirrored walls. She barely recognized herself, her eyes red-rimmed, her lips pressed into a thin line of quiet fury. The doors slid open, revealing the darkened foyer of their penthouse. It was eerily silent. Typically, Damien would have left the soft lighting on, maybe the hum of the news playing in the background. But tonight, the space felt hollow, like an abandoned kingdom. Her eyes flicked to the large clock above the fireplace. Nearly 1 a.m. Had he beaten her home? Had he waited for her? She took a deep breath, stepping inside, bracing herself for whatever confrontation awaited. Because tonight, she wouldn't be the one cowering. And she sure as hell wouldn't accept half-hearted apologies. Naomi stepped into the dimly lit penthouse, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. She dropped her purse onto a side table, her ears straining for any sound, any sign of life. Nothing. The silence felt deafening. On any other night, she might have taken a warm bath or curled up on the couch with a book. But now, all she felt was a gnawing, inescapable sense of violation. Then, keys rattled at the front door. Her pulse spiked. She turned just as the door swung open. Damien stepped inside, looking like a man who had barely survived a battle. Tie askew, eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled. For a long, heavy moment, they just stared at each other. "Naomi," he started, his voice low and unsteady. She lifted a trembling hand, cutting him off. "Don't." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of every shattered piece of her heart. His face crumpled with regret. He took a tentative step forward. "I never wanted you to find out like that," he said, his voice thick with something she refused to name. "It's complicated." Naomi let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "It's not complicated," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut. "You cheated on me, you lied to me, you betrayed me." Her voice caught on a sob. "I trusted you." Damien exhaled shakily, looking down. "I won't deny what you saw," he admitted, "but it wasn't just mindless cheating. Valerie, she's someone I've been working with closely for months. It started innocently, then." Naomi's stomach churned. "Innocent?" she repeated, her voice shaking with disbelief. She gestured toward the memory of the cafe courtyard of them. "You call that innocent?" Damien winced. "You humiliated me," she continued, the pain spilling out in waves. "If something was wrong in our marriage, you could have told me. We could have talked, we could have tried to fix it. But instead, you chose this." His shoulders sagged under the weight of his own guilt. "I know I handled it terribly," he admitted. "There's no excuse. Valerie and we got carried away." Naomi stared at him, her expression unreadable. "This isn't about me, is it?" she asked coldly. "It's about you, feeling overshadowed by your own success, the pressure, the expectations, so you turned to her?" Damien's silence was confirmation enough. Her anger flared. "A midlife crisis, Damien. That's your excuse?" Her voice rose, raw and unfiltered. "Do you even care how this looked to me? To everyone else? Do you even care how I feel? Or is this all just about your guilt?" He reached out as if to touch her, an instinct, a plea for comfort she refused to give. She stepped back so quickly it was almost a recoil. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Damien's face twisted with anguish, but Naomi didn't care. "You ruined our life together," she whispered, "and I have no idea how to move forward from this." For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to fight for something, to reach for words that could fix this. But none came. Finally, he bowed his head. "I'm begging you," he murmured. "Give me a chance to explain. Let me make this right." Naomi inhaled sharply, hugging her arms around herself. She was shaking, and she hated that. "Right now I need space," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I can't share a bed with you. I can barely stand in the same room as you." Damien opened his mouth, then closed it. He gave a slow, almost defeated nod. Without another word, Naomi turned and walked down the hallway. The guest bedroom door clicked shut behind her. She locked it, and then, finally, she collapsed onto the bed, pressing her face into the pillow as sobs racked her body. She had never thought she'd need this room, yet here she was. Despite the luxurious surroundings, everything felt hollow, irreparably broken. Sleep was fleeting. Every time Naomi drifted off, she jolted awake, the horrifying realization of Damien's betrayal sinking in all over again. Was this how her marriage ended? With separate rooms? With tear-streaked pillows and closed doors? The heartbreak ached like an open wound that refused to scab over. And in that long, sleepless night, she made a vow. If Damien thought he could talk his way out of this, if he believed that empty apologies and pretty words could mend what he had shattered, he was gravely mistaken. The next few days passed in a surreal blur. Naomi avoided Damien as much as possible. She woke early to slip out before he was awake. She spent her afternoons at Claire's or wandering aimlessly through the city, drowning in thoughts she didn't want to have. She wasn't sure what came next. But one thing was certain. She would never be the same again. The city became Naomi's refuge. She wandered through the quieter corners of Lincoln Park, letting the crisp autumn air clear her mind. But no matter how many deep breaths she took, no matter how long she sat on a bench watching leaves drift to the ground, the weight of what had happened never fully lifted. Avoiding the problem wouldn't make it disappear. Back at the penthouse, the tension was unbearable. She and Damien barely spoke. When they did, their conversations were clipped and impersonal, discussions about housekeeping schedules or whether the cleaning service had arrived. Trivial, empty words that did nothing to address the growing chasm between them. And when their paths did cross, Naomi saw it. The exhaustion in Damien's face, the way guilt sat on his shoulders like a leaden weight. But guilt meant nothing now. The damage was done. Naomi had tried to keep the betrayal contained within the walls of their penthouse, but the city had other plans. News of Damien's public indiscretion had begun to trickle into certain social circles. A friend of Claire's had been at the cafe that day and had recognized him. And once a story like that took root, it spread like wildfire. Whispered rumors floated through charity galas and business dinners. Naomi wasn't sure what was worse: the hushed condolences from acquaintances who pretended to care, or the way some people feigned obliviousness, their eyes filled with unspoken knowledge whenever they looked at her. But the betrayal didn't just shake her personal world. It was starting to crack the foundation of Damien's professional one, too. She overheard snippets of his phone calls, his normally composed tone tinged with something unfamiliar: strain. "I understand the client's concern?" His voice drifted through the closed study door, low but urgent. "But personal matters shouldn't impact the deal. We'll finalize the contract by next week. No, I've got it under control. Just tell them I'm still their point of contact." A moment later, the door opened and he stepped out looking drained. Naomi was standing in the hallway. Their eyes met, and a tense silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "Trouble in paradise?" Her voice was quiet, but the bitterness was unmistakable. Damien exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Some investors heard about the incident," he admitted. "It doesn't paint me in the best light. They're concerned about my stability." Naomi folded her arms. "Or your credibility," she corrected. "Hard to trust a man who cheats on his wife and can't keep his personal life in check." A flicker of something, pain, maybe, crossed his face. "Naomi, I'm trying to fix things," he said, his voice raw. "I've reached out to a counselor. I'll start therapy. Anything. Please, just believe me." She hugged herself, stepping back. "Are you trying to fix this because you regret what you did?" she asked, voice low. "Or because your business is falling apart?" Damien flinched, the truth too sharp to ignore. "Both," he admitted, barely above a whisper. "I do regret hurting you, more than anything. But I also know my reputation is at stake." Naomi's heart twisted. She saw it, the sincerity buried in his tired eyes. But it wasn't enough. Not when the memory of him holding another woman was still seared into her mind. Not when every event, every whispered conversation reminded her of what he had done. She shook her head. "Then you have a lot of work to do," she said simply before turning away. Late that night, Naomi lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling as the city lights cast shifting shadows across the walls. Could she ever trust him again? Outside the walls of their penthouse, the rumor mill churned. Damien's empire, once untouchable, was starting to crack under the weight of scandal. Perhaps, Naomi thought, this was the universe's way of ensuring that betrayal didn't go unpunished. Karma had begun to circle. And this time, it wasn't leaving quietly. A week slipped by. Each day was marked by unbearable silences and late-night arguments that flared briefly, only to be swallowed by exhaustion. But through the emotional wreckage, something unexpected happened. Naomi found herself growing increasingly curious about. Naomi couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman who had shattered her marriage. Who was Valerie, and just how deeply had her relationship with Damien truly run? Naomi tried to suppress the urge to confront her directly. After all, it wasn't Valerie who had broken vows, it was Damien. But the unanswered questions gnawed at her, refusing to be ignored. One evening, after Damien had stepped out for a meeting, Naomi found herself standing in his study, staring at the neatly organized rows of files on his desk. She wasn't proud of what she was about to do, but desperation outweighed guilt. Her hands moved almost on their own, flipping through folders, scanning documents, searching for anything that could piece together the truth. And then, she found it. A thick file labeled Valerie Monroe. Naomi's pulse quickened. She had just begun flipping through the pages when the study door creaked open behind her. Her breath caught. She spun around, expecting to see Damien. But instead, standing in the doorway was Harold Peterson, Damien's longtime head of finance. A sharp-eyed, middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed mustache. He carried a briefcase, his usual composed expression flickering with surprise. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted, clearing his throat. "I didn't realize you were in here." Naomi's heart pounded. "I was just tidying up. she said quickly, setting the folder down as casually as possible. Harold hesitated before stepping further inside. I was looking for some documents, Damien requested. Hope I'm not intruding. Naomi nodded, forcing a polite smile. Of course. Actually, Harold, can I ask you something? His brows lifted slightly. Certainly, if it's within my capacity. Naomi took a breath, steadying herself. You've known Damien a long time. Has he ever mentioned a relationship with one of his associates, Valerie Monroe? A shadow passed over Harold's face. His gaze flicked briefly to the folder still resting on the desk. I'm not sure what's appropriate to say, Mrs. Hayes, he replied carefully. But I can tell you that Miss Monroe was brought on as a consultant to expand our firm's marketing strategies. She's very capable. Naomi pressed her lips together. Capable, she repeated, at marketing, and apparently more than that. She exhaled shakily, the weight of it all pressing down on her. I'm sorry, you don't have to be in the middle of this. Harold hesitated, then set down the stack of papers he had retrieved. A flicker of something, sympathy, frustration, crossed his face. If I may speak freely, he said in a lower voice. I have great respect for Damien, but I've disapproved of this situation for some time. I learned about their involvement by accident. It was never my place to interfere, but I feared it wouldn't end well. Naomi's stomach twisted. Do you know how long it's been going on? She asked, bracing herself for the answer. Harold hesitated again, then said quietly, A few months, at least. A few months. Damien had been lying to her, betraying her for months. Naomi swallowed against the sharp ache in her chest. But Mrs. Hayes, Harold continued, his voice measured. Miss Monroe was persistent. She used her position to get close to Damien. Some of us suspected her intentions were entirely professional. Naomi clenched her jaw. So it hadn't just been an affair. Valerie had maneuvered her way into Damien's life, weaving herself into both his personal and professional world. Thank you, Harold, she whispered. I appreciate your honesty. He nodded, his expression softer now. You deserve better, Mrs. Hayes. And for what it's worth, if this scandal escalates, the board won't be pleased with Miss Monroe's methods. Naomi watched him leave, his words settling deep into her thoughts. She thought of the rumors already swirling through their social circles. The way Damien's business had begun to show cracks under the weight of his personal indiscretions. Had Valerie truly cared for Damien? Or had she simply used him, leveraging their affair for influence, power, and position? Naomi placed the folder back on the desk, her mind racing. She had spent the last few weeks drowning in heartbreak, letting grief consume her. But now she saw things more clearly. Valerie had set her sights on more than just Damien. She had targeted everything he had built. And Naomi was done being collateral damage. If Damien truly wanted to salvage their marriage, he would have to sever every last tie to Valerie. Otherwise, both his business empire and their life together would collapse under the weight of his betrayal. Naomi had spent too many nights drowning in heartbreak, tiptoeing around her own home like a ghost of the woman she used to be. But that ended today. She refused to remain passive any longer. The opportunity presented itself the very next afternoon when she walked past Damien's office and caught sight of his laptop, open, unattended. A single email stood out. Meeting with Valerie at 2 p.m. Ritz-Carlton Lounge. The subject line and time were impossible to ignore. Naomi's breath hitched. This wasn't going to be another accidental discovery. This time she would witness the truth on her own terms. At exactly 1:45 p.m., Naomi stepped into the Ritz-Carlton Lounge. The space was grand, yet intimate. Dim lighting, plush armchairs, the soft hum of a piano drifting through the air. She had dressed with intent, a sleek black trench coat over a fitted dress, her hair pulled back into a low chignon. Gone was the tear-streaked woman who had stumbled into Claire's apartment days ago. This Naomi was poised, unshaken, a woman who deserved answers. Her eyes swept the room. There they were, Damien and Valerie, seated in a secluded corner, their heads bent close over a set of documents. For a moment, Naomi hesitated, a flicker of raw pain threatening to surface. But then she remembered that humiliating afternoon at the cafe, the way they had touched, the way Damien had looked at her. She steeled herself and strode forward. Valerie saw her first. The other woman stiffened, color draining from her face. Her eyes darted anxiously to Damien, who had yet to notice. When he did, he shot up from his seat so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. Naomi. Her name left his lips in a breathless murmur, thick with dread. She smiled, tight, controlled. I could ask you the same. Her gaze shifted to Valerie, who sat frozen in place, her grip tightening around her pen. Discussing marketing strategies, are we? Damien cleared his throat, struggling to collect himself. We're finalizing some proposals. This is business? Naomi finished for him, arching a brow. The guilt in his expression told another story. Valerie seemed to recover enough to speak. Naomi, I'm sorry for the confusion. We didn't expect. Spare me. Naomi's voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the air like glass. Her gaze burned into Valerie. I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you've been doing with my husband. Valerie's lips parted, but no words came. Naomi turned to Damien. You told me you'd do anything to fix this, that you'd fight for our marriage. She gestured between him and Valerie. Yet here you are, with her again. Damien lifted his hands in a placating gesture. Naomi, I swear, this is a professional meeting. I ended things with Valerie after you found out. We're just finalizing her contract. Valerie's expression tightened. Yes, she interjected, her voice carrying a trace of frustration. We've discussed it. Damien and I agreed to keep our relationship strictly professional from now on. Naomi let out a sharp, bitter laugh. A little late for that, don't you think? She lowered her voice, but every syllable dripped with steel. Professional relationships don't include public embraces in cafes. Valerie shifted uncomfortably, her posture stiff. We never meant to hurt you, she murmured, though her attempt at contrition felt hollow. The room seemed to hush. Even the distant clink of silverware felt deafening. Damien reached for Naomi's hand. She pulled away. She hadn't come here for empty reassurances. She had come to see if his actions aligned with his apologies. And from the tension hanging between them, the answer was clear. Naomi straightened, her voice measured. Let me make this simple. Her words carried across the table, quiet but unwavering. This meeting ends with a complete severance of any personal relationship. Her gaze pinned Damien in place. Or I walk away from our marriage. I will not tolerate further betrayal. Damien exhaled shakily, his eyes flicking toward Valerie as if weighing the finality of Naomi's ultimatum. Then, at last, he spoke. It's over, he said, each syllable heavy. We ended it days ago, Damien said with finality, his voice strained but certain. This meeting is strictly about finalizing her marketing plan deliverables, I promise you. Across the table, Valerie swallowed, nodding stiffly. Yes, we're finishing the last handover documents, that's all. Naomi studied them both, her chest tight. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this affair was truly over, that this was just another painful chapter they could somehow, impossibly, move past. But trust wasn't regained overnight. She leaned in, her voice trembling with emotion. For your sake, I hope that's true, because if I sense even a hint of deception again, Damien, I'm done. No second chances. With that, she spun on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to run, to cry, to scream. The lounge door closed behind her, sealing off the confrontation. She exhaled a shuddering breath, gripping her coat tightly around herself. She hadn't gotten the closure she desperately craved, but she had drawn a line in the sand. One more lie, and the life they had built would crumble for good. In the days following that tense confrontation, a fragile sense of normalcy settled over their marriage. Damien insisted he had cut all ties with Valerie, that their partnership, both personal and professional, was over. He started coming home earlier, skipping the usual late-night business dinners, making an effort to ask about Naomi's day, to show interest in her life again. For a moment, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. At his request, they even started attending counseling, attempting, however cautiously, to explore whether trust could be rebuilt. But like a wound that had only superficially healed, their relationship remained fragile beneath the surface. The betrayal still lingered between them, unspoken but ever-present. And while the whispers in their social circles began to fade, the consequences of Damien's actions continued to ripple through his business. Rumors of impropriety had shaken some of his biggest clients. A few delayed their contracts. Others backed out entirely. Suppliers grew wary, uncertain if his personal scandal hinted at deeper instability within the company. And then, there was the board. His advisors were demanding clearer financial disclosures, concerned that his entanglements might have compromised the firm's integrity. One evening, Naomi found Damien in his study, surrounded by stacks of documents, his fingers combing through spreadsheets with an uncharacteristic frenzy. She leaned against the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. "Everything okay?" He glanced up, the shadows under his eyes more pronounced than ever. "The board is threatening to cut my discretionary powers if we don't recover this quarter," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "They're also investigating some of Valerie's expense reports, making sure nothing inappropriate was charged to the company." Naomi's brow furrowed. "Were there questionable expenses?" Damien exhaled heavily, leaning back in his chair. "A few dinners that might have been personal, some hotel charges labeled as business stays." His jaw tensed. "Things I was too careless about covering up because I never thought." He hesitated, looking away. "I never thought we'd get caught." Naomi's stomach twisted at his choice of words. "I see." He caught the pain in her expression and quickly added, "I regret all of it. But now, everything I've built is on the line. If the board loses confidence in me, the company could suffer irreparably." For the first time in weeks, Naomi saw something she hadn't let herself acknowledge. Damien wasn't just dealing with the fallout of their marriage. He was watching his entire world begin to collapse. And despite her anger, despite everything he had done, a small part of her still knew what this company meant to him. It was his identity, his life's work. She wanted to feel indifferent, wanted to let him drown in the consequences of his own actions. But the part of her that had spent years loving him, building a life with him, couldn't ignore his desperation. She cleared her throat, choosing her words carefully. "Then be transparent with them," she said, her voice even. "Own your mistakes. Lying or covering things up will only make this worse." Damien looked up, his eyes shining with something unreadable. "I know," he murmured. "I'm doing everything I can. But it feels like my life is unraveling at every seam." Naomi stood there, her emotions warring within her. She felt torn between wanting to comfort him and wanting to protect herself from further pain. Slowly, she took a step closer, placing a hand on the edge of his desk. She wasn't sure what she was doing. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she wondered, was there still something left to salvage? Or was she merely standing in the wreckage of something already beyond repair? Naomi's hand rested lightly on Damien's shoulder, a tentative bridge between the past and whatever remained of their future. "Then do what's right," she said softly. "Completely. Not for me, not for the board, for yourself. Stop hiding." Damien exhaled shakily, his fingers reaching up to cover hers. His voice trembled. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve your kindness after everything." Naomi offered a sad, small smile. "Kindness is all I have left to give you right now." Whether there would ever be more than that, whether anything between them could be rebuilt, was a question neither of them could answer. Leaving him with his documents and his crumbling world, she walked away, her footsteps echoing through the silent corridors of their home. She ached for the marriage they once had. But deep down, she knew, some things could never return to their former state. Karma had begun to strike, not just personally but professionally. Damien was caught in a maelstrom of his own making, and Naomi was only halfway convinced he even understood the full extent of the damage. But something told her, this wasn't over yet. Fate has a way of demanding its due. And Damien's debts were piling up. The notice arrived on a gray afternoon. A formal letter placed neatly on the foyer table, sealed in a crisp envelope. Naomi picked it up, running her fingers over the embossed letterhead. Hayes and Mercer Consulting. Inside, the words were terse but ominous. An emergency board meeting. Serious allegations. Urgency and resolution. The date was set for the next morning. By the time Naomi returned from her volunteer shift at the youth center, she found Damien pacing the living room, gripping the letter in one hand, his phone in the other. His face was drawn with dread. "They're not waiting until the end of the quarter," he said, his voice unsteady. "They want a resolution now." Naomi crossed her arms, keeping her expression unreadable. "Why?" Damien swallowed hard. "They suspect corporate funds were misused during my affair." He hesitated. Valerie was apparently billing certain personal expenses to the firm. If they confirm that, I'm done. I could even be facing legal action. Naomi's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. Is there any truth to it? Damien let out a heavy breath and sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. A bit. Valerie used a corporate card for some of our dinners. I never explicitly authorized it, but I didn't stop it either. That alone might be enough for them to claim negligence or fraud. Naomi lowered herself into a chair across from him, arms folded protectively across her chest. So the board meeting is tomorrow? He nodded, his cheeks flushed. Yes, I have to present evidence that I can fix this. Maybe reimburse the company from my personal funds. Possibly step down from certain leadership positions. I don't know. His voice wavered. I never thought it would end like this. Naomi inhaled deeply, steadying herself against the swirl of emotions inside her. You still have a chance to be honest, she said quietly. Own up to your mistakes. That might help. Damien looked up at her, desperation and gratitude flickering in his eyes. Will you come with me? His voice was barely above a whisper. Stand by my side? Naomi stiffened. Part of her wanted to see him face the consequences alone. Another part, one that still remembered the man she had once loved, hesitated. The man who had guided her through the labyrinth of high society. The man who had championed her philanthropic work without question. She exhaled slowly. Fine, she said at last. I'll go. Damien's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, she shook her head. Don't mistake my presence for blind loyalty, she warned. I need to hear the truth for myself. The following morning, Naomi dressed with purpose. A tailored navy suit, a crisp white blouse. Her hair pulled back into a neat bun. To the world, she looked every bit the poised, confident wife of a corporate mogul. But inside, her nerves coiled tight. Beside her, Damien donned a crisp gray suit. His face was solemn, his features taut with tension. Neither of them spoke as they rode in silence toward the towering downtown skyscraper that housed Hayes and Mercer Consulting. Because after today, nothing would ever be the same. Upon arrival at Hayes and Mercer Consulting, Naomi and Damien were immediately escorted to a large conference room. The air was thick with tension. The board members sat in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable. Scattered across the table were documents, expense reports, flagged transactions, references to possible code of conduct violations. Naomi's stomach tightened. This was worse than she had expected. Damien stood at the front of the room, clasping his hands together as if willing them to stop trembling. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but laced with raw honesty. He admitted that he had allowed personal and professional lines to blur, acknowledged that Valerie, though hired for marketing, had exploited that closeness. He confessed that he had failed to scrutinize her expenses carefully. And then, in a final attempt to salvage what little remained, he made an offer. He would repay every disputed charge, resign from certain leadership committees, do whatever it took to re-earn the board's trust. The board members listened in silence, and then the questions began. They pressed him on timelines, demanded receipts for every questionable transaction, lavish dinners, hotel stays, personal flights labeled as business expenses. Damien answered as best as he could, sometimes stammering, sometimes glancing at Naomi, searching for a flicker of moral support. And then the chairman spoke. His voice was heavy, weighted with finality. Mr. Hayes, your negligence has potentially exposed the company to legal and reputational risks. We will deliberate on a course of action. Please wait outside. In the hallway, Naomi and Damien stood side by side in silence. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the door reopened. A board member motioned for them to return. The chairman's gaze was unwavering as he delivered the verdict. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your CEO duties pending the outcome of an internal investigation. You may retain a minority stake in the company, but your power is significantly reduced. Furthermore, should additional evidence arise that you knowingly aided Miss Monroe's improper use of company funds, the firm may pursue legal action. Hush fell over the room. Naomi exhaled, her pulse racing. Damien stood motionless, absorbing the blow. After a long beat, he spoke. His voice hollow. I understand. Without another word, they turned and left. Inside the elevator, Damien's composure cracked. Tears brimmed in his eyes. "It's over," he whispered. His voice trembled. "Everything I built, gone." Naomi hesitated. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was overshadowed by the memory of his betrayal. She placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. "You're still here," she said quietly. "That counts for something." Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to Damien's personal apocalypse. The empire he once ruled over had collapsed. Now, he stood on the street, clutching Naomi's arm for support, both of them uncertain of where they stood. Professionally, personally, as a couple. The final chapter of their shared life loomed ahead. An answer was demanded, but neither of them was fully prepared to give it. In the weeks following Damien's fall from grace, life in the penthouse shifted in ways Naomi had never imagined. The once busy phone lines fell silent. Invitations to glitzy social events ceased. Colleagues and acquaintances who once clamored for Damien's attention now kept their distance, afraid of being associated with scandal. Financially, Damien was far from ruined. He still had substantial savings and assets outside the firm. But losing his CEO position, the role he had poured his life into, left him adrift. Mornings were spent in the penthouse library, scanning job listings, reaching out to old contacts, trying to gauge if there was any way back into the corporate world. But his spirit was different. For the first time, Naomi saw something new in his eyes. Humility, a realization of how his choices had led him here. And as for Valerie, the gossip suggested Valerie was gone. Rumors swirled that she had left the city, possibly to escape further scrutiny. Naomi felt a hollow satisfaction. At least that chapter had ended. Yet, the biggest question remained. Could she ever truly forgive Damien enough to stay? One crisp autumn afternoon, after a marriage counseling session, they found themselves walking through Lincoln Park in silence. Golden leaves crunched underfoot, a stark contrast to their old life of chauffeurs and black-tie galas. They walked side by side, not holding hands, but still maintaining a fragile closeness. Eventually, Damien spoke. "I know an apology isn't enough," he began softly, eyes fixed on the winding path ahead. "But I'm sorry, every single day, for what I did to us, for the terrible choices I made, in business, in our marriage. There's no excuse." Naomi tucked her hands into her coat pockets, her emotions warring within her. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied, her voice carried by the whispering wind. "But it still hurts. I replay that moment," she swallowed, "of you and Valerie over and over." Damien exhaled, pain etched across his features. "I know," he admitted. "Trust doesn't just bounce back. I'm prepared to keep working for it, in counseling, in everything, for as long as it takes, if you'll have me." They stopped near a pond where ducks glided across the water's glassy surface. Naomi took a shaky breath. She wanted to believe in redemption, wanted to believe people could change, but she also remembered the gut-wrenching pain of betrayal. "I want to give us a chance," she confessed, blinking back tears. "I do still love you, but if we're going to rebuild, we start from scratch. Honesty, total transparency, no more secrets, no more illusions." Damien's eyes moistened. He reached out tentatively, cradling her hand. For the first time in months, she didn't pull away. "I accept that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll earn your trust, step by step." They stood there in silence, watching the world move on around them. It dawned on Naomi that healing wouldn't come easily, that rebuilding would be slow, messy, full of setbacks. But life rarely offered neat endings. Damien's downfall had been the end of one era. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was also the beginning of another. One where humility and honesty might shape him into a better man. And where she could decide, on her own terms, if their love was worth saving. Through heartbreak, through betrayal, through the painful reckoning of truth. Naomi fought for her dignity. She demanded honesty. And in the end, she found the courage to decide her own future. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a reminder that resilience grows from life's hardest moments, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption. Your support allows us to continue bringing you stories that explore the raw complexities of human relationships and the unexpected ways karma reshapes our destinies. Thank you for watching.